Well, I now have a class that models a journal entry, a single journal entry. What I need is a class that will model a collection of journal entries. And a collection of journal entries is simply just a journal. So let's go ahead and create a journal class to model a collection of journal entries. So I'll hit Command N. I'm going to choose Swift file. It's going to be called journal. I'll make sure it's in this group. I'll hit Create. And now I have a blank journal class. So I can make class journal. And it's going to contain some entries. And again, the entries are just going to be an array of type journal entry, so that when I create a class journal, I'll have some entries as part of that. So let's go ahead and start to implement some of this functionality. I'm going to go ahead and take out this sample data, and I'm going to replace it with a instance of my journal class. Okay, so I'm going to create a new journal, make it a journal class, and you can see I have some errors here, but I'm going to go ahead and fix that in just a second. So let's go ahead and start to populate this. And I'm going to do it in my view did load, so this will happen whenever my view starts up. And I'll create the sample loop for an index in 0 to less than 1,000. I'll say journal dot entries, right, which is that array. I'm going to append. And what am I appending? I'm appending a journal entry. And the date is going to be whatever the current date is. And the contents will be contents for entry and then index. I think I need one more parentheses there. So it looks like I have an extra bracket here. I want to go ahead and get rid of that one. And that should take care of the errors, again, except for the sample data ones. So in my loop, I'm just appending to my journal entry, given the date and the contents for entry. The first time it goes through, the index is 0, so it's 0, then 1, and so on up through 999. So I need to update this. So I've got to do, let me go ahead and update my sample data. So it's really journal.entries, right? Because I want to find the number of entries in this journal. Okay. And then my label text will be, you can erase that. It'll be the contents of each journal entry. So it'll be this, and then journal.entries, and then whichever the index of whichever row I'm at. So it's index path, dot row. Make sure that it's okay. Okay, so now if I run this, see what that looks like. And now it says the date and the time of each entry. If I scroll down, it's all the same since these are all instantiated at the same time. So that looks pretty good so far. So there are some improvements to be made in the code, however. Right now, we want to be able to find the number of entries in a journal, and this journal.entries.count is a little cumbersome. It'd be nicer if we could just have journal.count, but we don't have that functionality yet. So we're going to go ahead back to our journal class, and we're going to create a computed property. So we'll do var count. It's going to be of type integer, and we're going to return entries.count. So now the journal is going to tell us exactly how many entries there are, which makes this, I think that's right, a little more easy to understand how that works. Let's go ahead and run this to make sure that nothing's changed. Yep, that still looks okay. And if you notice, our viewDidLoad method here is interacting directly with entries. So it's actually creating these entries, which I'm not sure we want to do. So we want to go back to the journal entries, and we want to make this private, so that we have to compute our entries a slightly different way. So now we should have an error saying that this doesn't have access to it anymore. We're going to modify our journal class so that it's going to have an initializer that's going to take an array of entries when it's created. So we'll do init entries, and it's going to take an array of type journal entry. And we'll say self.entries equals entries. So now, in order to create an instance of a journal class, it must be passed an array of entries instead of being able to access this class directly, which is probably a little bit safer. So let's go back to our table view controller. And now we need to find a way to pass our array of journal entries to our class. And as you've seen before, sometimes these for loops aren't the best way, but that map is obviously sometimes a little bit better. So let's get rid of this for loop. And we are going to modify our journal property to actually create a series of entries to pass to it. So we're going to say entries, and it's going to be 0 to less than 1,000 dot map. And as part of our map closure, we'll do journal entry. I'm going to create a new journal entry, and the date will be the NS date, and the contents will be contents for entry. And then, so this all looks familiar. And there, and then I need a bracket and a parentheses. I can get rid of that. Do this. Looks a little neater. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm using the map function, and it is creating an array of journal entries. Each one, it'll say contents for entry and then the index number as it goes through. And then that array gets passed to the journal class as it's being instantiated, this journal instance. So I'm doing a lot in one statement. I'm using map to create an array, and then I'm passing that array to the journal class to create a new instance called journal. So you can see I still have an error in my self-arrow at index path method of table view. And since it does rely on the number of entries, if this array is out of bounds, it's going to throw up an error and crash my app, which is not good. So we want to be able to retrieve a single entry and return a single entry. So let's go ahead and go to our journal class and make those changes. I'm going to add a couple methods here. So I'm going to make a function add entry, and I'm going to call it entry. It'll be of type journal entry. And when I add an entry, all I'm going to do is take my array of entries and append whichever entry I have. Whoops, I have two. Let me get rid of one of these. There we go. So now I have the ability to, instead of having to pass an array of entries and that being the only way to get an entry, I can add an entry on the fly. If I want to retrieve an entry, I can refer to an entry by its index, If I could spell it, it's an integer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to return whatever entry is at that index. So I'm going to return a journal entry. It's an optional, so we'll make sure that it's going to return something. I can say if the index is greater than or equal to 0 and the index is less than entries.count. So as long as the index I'm given is greater than 0, so it's within the range of the number of entries I have, I can return the entry at that particular index. Otherwise, I'm going to return nil. And again, that's just to be safe. This is again using optional, so I won't crash the app if it's out of bounds. So now if I go back to my table view controller, I can update this. I've got let label, text label. I can say the entry for that label equals journal dot entry, and whatever my index is, index path dot row. Okay, so whatever row I'm at, retrieve the entry for that row, and then I'll just let the text of that row be the entry I just retrieved. Oh, let me go back here. This should be all right. I think I need a bracket here. All right, so hold on. I need a bracket here. There we go. So now everything works, or at least I have no errors. Let's see if this works now. And I have my dates and times again, but it's much safer this way so that my app is not going to crash. So when I get an entry, I'm making sure that it's within the range of the number of entries I do have. So I'm not going to go out of bounds here, which is better. So let's try to run this one more time. And if you notice, if I click on a cell, it's highlighted, but nothing happens. So we need to be able to program that functionality for when a user taps on a particular cell.